of Ramakrishna Mission Sikshanamandira convey my humble and respectful
অভিক
pranam to
অভিক হ্যাঁ,
Pranam.
একটু এনশিওর হয়ে নাও যে ডক্টর লক্ষ্মী শিব রামকৃষ্ণন এসেছেন কিনা। আমি ম্যাডাম অনুরাধা ব্যানার্জিকে দেখতে পাচ্ছি।
ম্যাডাম এসেছেন, ম্যাডাম এসেছেন। Myself, Avik Gupta, a second year B.Ed trainee of Ramakrishna Mission Sikshanamandira, convey my humble and respectful pranam to everyone present in this webinar, organized by our institution to observe World Habitat Day. Our institution has been regularly organizing various webinars related to education and other contemporary burning topics. Today is the first Monday of October 2021. In 1985, United Nations designated the first Monday of October every year as the World Habitat Day in order to reflect on the state of our habitat and the basic right of all to adequate shelter. The day is also intended to remind the world that we all have a role and responsibility to shape the future of our cities and towns. World Habitat Day was first celebrated in the year 1986 with the theme Shelter is My Right, with Nairobi, the capital of Kenya, as the first host city. Thereafter, various themes like shelter for the homeless, shelter and urbanization, future cities, safer cities, cities without slum, etc. came up, hosted by New York, London, Bonn, Dubai, Kuka, etc. in the past year. The theme of this year's World Habitat Day is accelerating urban actions for a carbon-free world, aiming towards the reduction of massive amount of carbon emission produced by the cities across the world. In this webinar, we have two eminent speakers with us, Dr. Anuradha Banerjee and Dr. Lakshmi Shivaramakrishnan. Dr. Anuradha Banerjee is the professor of the Center for the Study of Regional Development, School of Social Science, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Dr. Lakshmi Shivaramakrishnan is the professor of Department of Geography, Jadavpur University. We are very much privileged to have them with us in this webinar. Dr. Anuradha Banerjee will throw light about the carbon-affected cities of the world, a perspective, and Dr. Lakshmi Shivaramakrishnan will guide us through the inclusive cities and sustainable communities with special reference to Kolkata. Now, I request Srimat Swami Urjita Nandaji Maharaj, the controller of examination of our institution, to deliver the welcome address. Pranam Maharaj.
Om Namo Bhagavate Ramakrishna. Salutations to Sri Ramakrishna. Good morning. At the outset, on behalf of Ramakrishna Mission Shikshan Mandira, an autonomous postgraduate teacher education college situated in the close proximity of the sacred precincts of Belur Mutt, the headquarters of worldwide Ramakrishna Mutt and Ramakrishna Mission, I would like to welcome you all. Today, World Habitat Day, and we are going to celebrate this day by a webinar. And we are lucky to have two eminent speakers. They are like two stars of the geography intelligentsia. Our first speaker is Dr. Anuradha Banerjee, Professor, Center for the Study of Regional Development, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Dr. Banerjee will speak on the topic, Carbon-Affected Cities of the World, a Perspective. On behalf of our college, I welcome Dr. Anuradha Banerjee. Dr. Banerjee, welcome, regards, and namaskar. The next topic of today's webinar is Inclusive Cities and Sustainable Communities, with special reference to Kolkata. And on this topic, the speech will be delivered by Dr. Lakshmi Shivaramakrishnan. Professor, Department of Geography, Jadavpur University. On behalf of Sikshanamandira family, I welcome Dr. Shiva Ramakrishnan. Dr. Shiva Ramakrishnan, namaskar, regards, and welcome.
Namaste. Namaste.
I welcome all other who are present in this Google Meet platforms, our faculties, dear students, all other, as well as those who are watching in YouTube live streaming platform. I would like to welcome them to in advance who will watch this webinar as a recorded version in near future. And I am sure that these two speeches will enlighten and enrich us all. We are ready with rapt attention to listen their speeches. Keep watching, keep listening. Have a good day. Sri Sharadar Panamastu, dedicated to Holy Mother Sharada Devi, the goddess Saraswati herself. Avik, over to you.
Now, I request our first speaker, Dr. Anuradha Banerjee, to enlighten us with her speech. Pranam, madam.
It gives me immense pleasure to present my talk today on carbon-affected cities of the world on the occasion of World Habitat Day organized by Ramakrishna Mission, Sikshanamandira, Belur Math, Howrah. I am indeed grateful to Swami Urjitananda, Controller of Examinations, Ramakrishna Mission, for giving me this wonderful opportunity and for the welcome address. I am also thankful to Sri Ali Kumar Mandal, Ramakrishna Mission, for being part of this program, and to Abhik Gupta for introducing the speakers, and my heartiest welcome to all participants. Namaskar, Shamiji. I would now like to upload my presentation first, and if there is any problem in viewing, please do let me know, and after that I will start my talk. Is my screen visible to everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am, visible.
So I would like to present, and as it has been already told that I would be speaking on carbon-affected cities of the world, a perspective. Now, we are celebrating the World Habitat Day, as has been already told again, that the first Monday of October every year we celebrate, and this time it happens to fall on October 4th. And it is a consistent effort on part of world community to address the problems of rapid urbanization. And this day has been recognized by the United Nations. There are too many problems arising out of rapid urbanization, that is on the environment, on emissions, on human poverty and the rest. And also the aim is to provide basic right to adequate shelter and housing for all, so which we often overlook as problems of rapid urbanization. So I start off my lecture with a little bit focus on carbon cycle. I know that all of you must be knowing about the carbon cycle, how it is the green plants that act as carbon sink and also produce food because through photosynthesis, whereas all other processes, be it humans, be it animals, be it human activities, it adds on to carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So cycling of carbon or carbon cycle is a very, very essential process because of which there is existence of life on the earth, because it produces food, fuel, fiber for everybody. And at the basis of this is the photosynthetic organisms, that is the plants that absorb carbon dioxide and provides food to all. Now, carbon dioxide is the second most abundant greenhouse gas we know that keeps our planet warm. Otherwise, we would have very, very cold temperatures and human life would have been impossible. But It also has the property to get overheated. And now we have already reached alarming levels of heating due to carbon emissions, with the potential to heat more than 4 degrees centigrade by 2100s. And that would deplete all our cryosphere. Now I will define the word cryosphere. The cryosphere is an all-encompassing term for all those portions of the Earth's surface where water is found in its solid form. It cannot be equated to hydrosphere because on the land surface also we have frozen water in many parts. And just imagine if all this disappears, then catastrophe would not be far off. The second question, since we are discussing cities, why cities? Because we know cities are engines of growth. They are the driving mechanisms from which growth is initiated because of various activities within the city, the economic activities, and it also has the capability to sustain a huge population of the world. So they are basically the compact areas with very, very high densities. And because of the growth of the cities and because of the livelihood opportunities of the cities, the activities, human activities keep on multiplying. And as activities go on increasing, that means more and more consumption will take place, and more consumption will lead to more of carbon emissions. So high energy use and dense population go hand in hand. That is why the city has emerged as carbon dioxide hotspots. And the main sectors for this are commercial sectors, the electricity sectors, residential buildings, that is domestic consumption, industries, transportation. And this feat of urbanization, that is more and more people congregating in the urban areas, will continue into the future. And this will go on increasing the emissions. So the point over here is that unless we take very, very stringent action to reduce emissions through all platforms, be it urban planning, be it at the national level, state level, community level, and particularly industrial and individual levels also, we cannot control the emissions once and for all. Now the question is, where did we go wrong? The wrong, it comes to the way of our indiscriminate use of non-renewable energy resources. And part of that is because of growing industrialization. For all growth and national development to take place, we know growth is essential. And that means that the factor of pollution also gets enhanced. And these days, what is happening is basically industries are getting shifted towards the urban fringe areas. That is, the areas surrounding the main urban centers, where the regulations are the weakest and there is no clear authority structure. So the problem is getting compounded. And moreover, cities are the consumption of powerhouses we have been consuming mindlessly. And this process has started long back, but with forces of globalization, human beings are running at all-time high consumption levels. And that has blurred the line between what is needed and what is the desire and how much we should use it. So it is not merely overheating, depleting glaciers, choked cities, but this kind of an effect when we talk about atmospheric carbon and carbon emissions, it directly impacts on the food supply as well as climate change. We have seen how world climate is changing very, very drastically. Now, 2.5 billion people will be living in over 1,600 cities globally, where the national food supply will be threatened by climate change. And Indian cities are not far behind. The 650 million people over 500 cities are already at risk of not only food supply, but water shortages, because the water resources have been depleting also very, very fast. That means that there will be serious implications for not only the developed part of the world, more so for the developing and underdeveloped part of the world, because these are the poorer countries. And we will find it extremely difficult to balance development needs and the need for cleaner, sustainable environment. So the damage that is being done and will be done in future, unless we take stringent actions, would be real. It would be unprecedented. It would be ever increasing. And to some extent, it would be irreversible. Cities are responsible for 75% of the global carbon emissions. And these emissions primarily come from industries, transportation, buildings, and half of the urban emissions come from just 15% of the cities. And these are the cities in the developed nations as well as the cities of the developing nations and the rich cities that add a lot to our industries. And I have listed over here the name of the cities. I'm going to take it up in a far more detail in my coming slides. And more importantly, I want to state over here that residents of just 100 cities account for 20% of humanity's overall carbon footprint. Within India, we have Delhi that has passed unprecedented levels, and the carbon emissions of Delhi are combined that of Bengaluru, Hyderabad, Chennai, if put together. Now, the world will probably reach or exceed 1.5 degrees of warming within the just next 2 decades, and it may warm up by 4.4 degrees centigrade by 2100. And so this means that there'll be catastrophic results, the things we are already witnessing today. So this is the report of Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change of the 6th Assessment Report of 2021. This also means that we will lose out on our stored ice, that is the continental ice caps in the Antarctica, Greenland, and that will be a rise in sea level. Sea level is already rising, we know. That means that most of our populations that are in the coastal areas are already under serious threat. Many of the coastal countries and the islands will go underwater. And conditions would be not much better for India also, because India has a very long coastline, as all of us know. So this slide explains the 2021 IPCC report, that what would happen if we consider low emission scenario, high emission scenario, and greater impacts from high emission scenario. So as I have already said, that the global air temperatures will rise, precipitation would also increase, mean sea level rises there, and ice caps and all other forms of ice and frozen water would disappear from this planet. That means the entire climate will be changing very, very fast. The IPCC report also explains that all the evidences that we have till now, which are already underway, like concentration of carbon dioxide, unmatched for at least 2 million years, glacial retreat, warmer decades, last decade warmer than any period for 125,000 years, sea level rise, summer Arctic ice coverage smaller than any time in the last 1,000 years, ocean warming faster than any time, and ocean acidification. So the fallout is immense. And recently we have seen that a lot of untold and sudden hazards and disasters have taken place world over. And these can be attributed to this kind of climate change, whether you talk about floods in Europe, in India, cloudbursts in the Himalayan region, forest fires, and the rest. Now, I would focus a little bit on the carbon effect. All of us know what is the greenhouse effect and the heat budget of the earth, that is balancing the incoming and outgoing energy. But now what we are doing is that we have tampered with this. So this is very, very important. One should understand that without greenhouse effect, life would have been impossible on this earth. But because of human activities, we have helped the natural processes to trap more of energy within the Earth's climate, and therefore warming goes on. The other factor, which is also important, is that because of human activities, we have changed the nature of land surfaces. Clearance of forests, deforestation, construction, too much of construction activities, all have resulted a lot of problems along with emission of pollutants, and this has affected the Earth's energy balance. So a little bit more insight into the carbon effect before I go on and talk about the global cities and also the Indian cities. The factors that have contributed to the carbon effect are enormous. The basic factor behind everything is population, increase of population in the cities in particular, because everyone wants to move into the cities. So there is a migration factor of migration and also the natural increase in cities. So that means increased demand for resources. And as cities go on increasing, we have depleted also our natural vegetation. Increase in consumerism, which I have already pointed out, we are consuming more than we need. Industrial emissions, emissions from transportation sector, and because of increased human activities, the built up land use, there is what we know, the production of urban heat island, and increased demand has led to changing land use patterns. So all of these are affecting the carbon that is there. Now the vicious cycle of carbon effect and warming of the planet continues, because I have already explained how population pressure, how high consumption of energy, the transportation emissions have resulted in warming of the planet. And if warming continues, it will also add on to increased intensity of carbon production. Now, having said so, I would like to focus a little bit on the global scenario when we talk about carbon affected cities of the world before coming to India. So for the top 200 cities with highest emissions, more than half of the emissions come from just 25 cities. And if you see the world as a whole, China is one of the countries which have very high concentration of emissions. Also, other developed cities are also not lagging behind like the United States, and many of the Southeast Asian cities also, and the East Asian cities also. I'll be talking about that. So the Chinese problem is that because of rapid urbanization and industrialization in China, there's too much reliance on coal energy. In India also, we use a lot of our non-renewable energy resources. So this is one of the reasons why we are releasing more of carbon into the atmosphere. As on a per person basis, that means per capita basis, cities with the highest emissions are not only in China, but as I have told, also in North America and Europe. And you will find that transportation and residential consumption is more in the developed part of the country, whereas since the developing countries are now industrializing, their demands are also very great. So this is the difference which I was meaning. When you look into the developing part of the world, high overall emissions are mostly because of industrial emissions, because most of these countries have gained independence at a later point of time, and they have to industrialize at all costs. So that is why it is for their development requirements that this problem is there. Whereas in the developed part of the world, because their per capita consumption levels are very, very high. So as a result, they are also having high per person emissions. And also because of fast transportation in the cities, residential uses, they are having an energy intensive lifestyle. So I want to focus on certain of the high impact cities of the globe. Within the highest emitting countries of the world, individual urban clusters are main contributors to the national carbon footprint. So we have the pink ones as level 1, then level 2 is the yellow one, and level 3 is the green one. So I will just focus a little bit on these clusters. As you can see, China, Guangzhou, it stands out in carbon emissions, followed by Hong Kong and Shanghai. Similarly, if you take Germany, it is Cologne, then Berlin and Hamburg. Canada, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. London, UK, London, Manchester, Birmingham. Now, there are other cities also. If you see Russia, Moscow stands out, followed by St. Petersburg and Novosibirsk. In Japan, it is Tokyo, Yokohama, followed by Osaka, Nagoya. These are clusters with the highest clusters of carbon emissions. South Korea, it's Seoul, then Busan and Daegu. Iran, Tehran, Mashabad and Effasan. Then India, of course, New Delhi, Kolkata and Mumbai. I will be taking this up in a minute. Now this graph shows the point which I was wanting to make, that the per capita emissions are highest for the developed part of the world, whereas you have the developing part of the world, it is the total emissions in millions of metric tons. Now I'll just take you through the major cities, and I won't discuss on it in great detail. So these are the carbon affected cities of the world. First, you can see Seoul in South Korea with a population size of 21.3 million. Carbon ranking is 1. But Seoul, even though it tops the list, it has started controlling the emissions. It is using drones to crack down illegal incineration. Incineration is the way we burn hazardous wastes. Because of increased consumption and consumerism, we are having also a huge amount of waste generated in the cities. Then this is Guangzhou. Guangzhou, we know, it is one of China's most important centers for automobile manufacturing. So it has also started controlling or controlling the carbon emissions. Guangzhou has a population of about 44.3 million. We know China is the population, China, India are the population giants. So this is all these cities are serious, the air is serious public threat. Guangzhou has introduced taxis and electric vehicles. The New York City. New York has a population of 13.6 million, third in ranking, and this is again because of fossil fuels released from motor vehicles factories, but it is also, US has also started curbing the emissions. Fourth is Hong Kong, China. You have a population of 6 million, carbon ranking is 4, and it is trying to introduce environmental friendly vehicles, new encouraging energy efficiency in buildings and lower use of coal and electricity. Los Angeles, 13.5 million, carbon ranking is 5. Again, the transportation sector contributes this kind of emissions, and it is also trying all over United States, they're trying to curb the emissions. Shanghai, China, population of 23.8 million, carbon ranking is 6, and as one can see, it is the industries that is contributor to this kind of emissions. Singapore is 7, and 93% of the emissions come from the oil refineries in Singapore. Chicago, 7.26 million, carbon ranking 8. It has also started restricting the problem and addressing the problem of emissions. Tokyo, Japan, carbon ranking is 9 with a population of 32.9 million. These are mega cities of the world which are facing threat in the rise of, that a rise in sea level will affect this island archipelago country very, very soon. The 10th is Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and biggest oil producer. We know that it has also a high emissivity rate. and population is 5.74 million. Now I move on to India, and I want to briefly focus on what is happening in the Indian sector. That is, coal and power plants, transportation sectors are major sources of emissions, but with increasing consumerism in our country also, the emissions from the residential sector is also rising very steeply. And though on a whole, the per capita emissions remain well below the global average. However, India is very, very vulnerable to climate change. We already know that the Himalayan glaciers are melting very fast, and there are very, very catastrophic events taking place, like flash floods, cloud bursts taking place in the Himalayan region every year. And as far as Indian cities are concerned, we are rapidly urbanizing, in a sense that the total population of urban areas are immense. And, we will be having about 7 megacities, that is 10 million plus cities by 2050, and more than 50% of the population will be residing in the urban areas. And not only that, the urban areas are extending into the rural areas. Peri-urbanization is taking place in a very, very fast manner, and that is even more worrisome, because all the green spaces, not only the greens outside the city, but the urban greens, urban sinks, and water bodies within the urban areas are getting lost because of this kind of population increments in the Indian scenario. Currently, India is accounting for 6.5% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and 7th among the 10th most affected countries as per the Global Climate Risk Index of 2021. Already we have seen that how heat waves are occurring recurrently over the last few years, and about 142 Indian cities will be affected by 2050. And the death rate because of the heat waves will also increase very, very rapidly. And cities like Chennai, Mumbai, Delhi, and other cities, the deaths are increasing because of heat waves. Now, the sector-wise emissions, if we look into Indian cities, we will find that these are the sectors, as one can see on this slide. This is energy, agriculture, industrial processes, land use, wastes. They're adding to the emissions. So it is seen in our country that it is not only the class 1 cities, but also the other classes cities are also adding to this carbon emissions. And the reasons I have already explained. If one sees the other causes, I have already said that we are depleting our urban greens and water bodies. And so what is basically happening is that we are losing out on our natural carbon sinks. And this is particularly true for all cities, but very stark in Bengaluru, which we have seen this, in Delhi also the same case, and together the geographic location and meteorological factors are compounding the problem. In Delhi, we find that surrounding regions, agricultural zone, there is a huge amount of stubble burning, and this has led to carbon emissions. So during winters, Delhi comes under a blanket of thick smog. Moreover, personalized vehicles have increased in recent years, and that is how we are going on adding to this problem. So some little bit of data as to where we stand. This is carbon dioxide equivalent emissions per capita and total carbon emissions equivalent to greenhouse gas equivalent. We can see that if you take this, then Delhi tops the list, followed by Mumbai, Chennai, Bengaluru, and then Kolkata. Whereas per capita emissions, Kolkata is also quite significant. It's 3.29. So I'll just rush through these slides, which shows where the cities, the major cities, the positioning major cities in total carbon dioxide emissions, in equivalent of greenhouse gases. So Delhi stands out and then you have Mumbai, Chennai. This is total carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. This is that produced from the electricity sector. When you can see electricity, blue is electricity that is being consumed, and their auxiliary consumption is the ash, and electricity consumption from other sources is orange. So this is the situation in Delhi, Mumbai, and then Chennai, Bengaluru, Kolkata, Hyderabad, Ahmedabad. This is transportation sector. Again, Delhi tops the list, followed by Bengaluru and Hyderabad. Then this is industrial sector. Industrial sector, it is Chennai, Delhi, Kolkata, and the blue one is the fertilizer industry. Waste, domestic wastes, wastewater, everything adds on to the emissions, carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, where you can see again Delhi tops the list, whether you talk about municipal solid waste or domestic wastes. Now, a little bit on the greenhouse gas footprint of the major cities, Indian cities. Like in Delhi's case, you see transportation sector stands out, followed by the domestic sector. Then you have Mumbai. Mumbai, it is the domestic sector, followed by transportation and also electricity consumption. This is Kolkata. Kolkata, the domestic sector occupies a huge chunk, and then you have others like electricity consumption, industries, and transportation. Then you have Chennai. Chennai, it is the domestic sector again, which is about 39%. And then you have the other sectors, of which industry next to domestic is the industrial sector. So this has a visible impact. That is the impact of carbon effect we can see now very clearly all over the world and also in India. In Delhi, this is a recurrent problem of how the ambient air quality becomes unbearable. In Bengaluru, there is no water, so is also Chennai's case. Urban flooding has become very common in many cities. We have seen how it occurs in Mumbai, how it occurs in Chennai. Of course, there are other factors, but these events are not normal. Then lack of fresh water supply and recent floods, flash floods occurring in many parts of the world. So on the whole, let me reiterate this point once again. Increases in urban population is very, very problematic because population stabilization, particularly in the developing part of the world, is necessary. Secondly, human consumerism is also running at an all-time high. So all these, together with increments in human activities, industrialization, increased transportation, increase in construction activities, and increase in waste generation, all these have led to a lot of carbon and has resulted in warming of our atmosphere. So Earth's climate today has become warmer and it's getting warmer and warmer, and we are heading for a catastrophe unless timely action is taken in this regard. The other point that I should mention over here, that we are even now consistently using non-renewable energy resources, and that produce more of carbon, like coal, petroleum, and other resources. So curbing of non-renewable energy use is also necessary. Together with that, human activities, particularly deforestation, should be controlled. There should be afforestation. Even within urban areas, the urban planning should incorporate urban forestry, urban vegetation growth. That is, fragmentation of urban greens should be stopped by all means. So there are many, many issues when we talk about carbon affected cities of the world. And the pathway to control this, to curb this, is not easy by any means, unless and until there is a concerted effort at all levels, be it global level, national level, state level, local urban body level, community level, and at the individual level. We have seen that the Paris Agreement has also already embarked a goal of reducing global greenhouse gas emissions. And this is an effort to limit the global temperature increase in this century to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, while pursuing it to limit to 1.5 degrees level. If we do not do so, then there'll be a catastrophe in future. The European Union, Japan, Republic of Korea, together with more than 110 countries, have pledged carbon neutrality by 2050. India is also committed towards this. We have nationally determined contribution NDC under the Paris Agreement that aims to reduce its carbon emissions intensity by 33 to 35% from 2005 levels to 2030. And India is already implementing National Action Plan on Climate Change since 2008. The National Clean Air Program, NCAP in short, was launched in January 2019, had listed the preparation and implementation of city-specific air quality management plans. And as a matter of fact, because Delhi appears to be the most polluted city and the city which is contributing the highest towards carbon emissions, it is also implementing its own tailor-made graded action plan, which is based on real-time emission levels in the city for limiting emissions within the city. Because within the city it is must, and emissions within the city also spread to the surrounding areas. With that, I think I have spoken more than my scheduled time, and thank you everybody for your patient hearing, and I end my lecture over here. Thank you one and all.
Ma'am, Madam has wonderfully and very lucidly explained us about the carbon-affected cities of the world. We could all feel the warmth present in her lecture, and this will definitely help us in future. Now, I request Dr. Lakshmi Shiva Ramakrishnan, our second speaker, to put some light on the inclusive cities and the sustainable communities with special reference to Kolkata. Pranam.
A very warm good morning to all of you. And I'm firstly very thankful to Swami Urjitananda, Controller of Examination, Ramakrishna Mission, Velur, Mr. Oli Kumar Mondol, and Obi Gupta for inviting me for this prestigious lecture on World Habitat Day. As being the second speaker, it becomes very easy because the introductory factor has already been put forward my friend and colleague, Professor Banerjee from JNU. So she has given us a global view of the problems of carbon emission. I would like to come closer to home and specifically talk about the inclusive city model, which was one of the major agenda in the last World Habitat. This was the theme in 2020. And I think it's one of the most important components, as you see that we are rapidly urbanizing, as already mentioned. And with rapid urbanization, particularly in developing countries, we have a lot of rural-urban migration. Now, this rural-urban migration ultimately lands up in the slums or the informal settlements in most of the Indian cities, and not only the Indian cities, but also in the developing countries. Now, with this background, I am putting forward my presentation. Just give me a minute. I hope the slide is visible for everyone. Can you all see it?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
You can
Yes,
see
ma'am,
it.
it's
Okay,
visible.
thank you. Okay. So we start off with this inclusive cities. Now, what does this mean? Like as I was telling you, we have a lot of population living in the informal sector, or what we call the slums, the sort of settlements known by different names as bastis, cheri, jhopatpattis in different parts of India. Now, it's often seen that in the course of urban development in the Indian cities, these people are left out. Now, the main agenda of World Habitat Day is particularly to emphasize on a shelter over the head for each and every one in the city. Each and every one citizen should have access to a shelter. A shelter means a proper shelter over his family, to safeguard his family from all vagaries of climate and all other problems which he may face in an urban area, she may face in an urban area, and should also have access to the basic amenities which are each and every citizen of a city enjoys. Now, so we start off with the first thing, which has been put forward by the UN, that everyone counts, that the cities of tomorrow should be such that each and every one should have the access to all basic amenities. Okay? But actually, in reality, what we see, this is the stark reality which we see in most Indian cities, where you're seeing on the right hand side a gated community, and on the left hand side, you are seeing a informal sector. So, what is an inclusive city? Now, it is a city which is governed by democratic institutions. It promotes equal opportunities, and it should be sustainable in nature, and it should include all the people, particularly those who are habitually excluded from all development activity. Now, this is a part of the Sustainable Goal 11, which has been included also in the World Habitat Agenda. Now, the three important components over here are inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable cities. Now, spatial inclusion becomes very important. Now, why are we emphasizing on urban areas? It's basically, as I already mentioned, that we have an exodus of population coming from rural to urban areas, and hence these migrants who come do not have the means of getting a proper household, and inevitably they land up in the most unsuitable areas for human habitation. So urban inclusion, very essential, particularly with respect to very good housing, water, sanitation, or the basic requirements. Social inclusion becomes very important. As I said, the urban poor, they do not fit under the urban circumstances or the urban environment, due to which they are left out or they are not heard in many of the activities which take place in the city. And last but not the least is the job, that is the economic factors, where most of them get incorporated in the informal sector, and this informal sector is not recognized by the government, and they are often face a lot of discrimination from the governing authorities, from the police, and also from other citizens. So this economic exclusion of the informal sector within the ambit of the formal sector is very essential for making them inclusive in nature. Now, the sustainable cities and communities, as proposed by the World Bank, urban disaster risk management, resilience, and land global practices, includes the 4 dimensions. That is sustainable communities. Environmentally, it is seen that most of these informal sectors, they live under the most unhygienic conditions. So this should be emphasized on. Secondly, they face the vagaries of natural shocks, as we have seen in the last week due to the immense downpour in Calcutta. It's not only in the informal settlements, but also in major parts of the city have been inundated because of this natural disaster. So resilience to this has to be built up among these communities, and these communities must be made inclusive, that is, they should be included in all aspects of the urban space. And last but not the least, that these communities should be competitive in nature and jobs should be generated so that they become economically more sustainable. Now, this is nothing but a visual depiction of how the challenges we face and the solutions, which clearly shows that urban planning should promote sustainable building, low carbon transport, as already mentioned by Professor Banerjee, which is very essential in order to build communities and cities which are, environment friendly. Then you should invest in renewable sources of energy, and the projects which are taken should be such that they are resistant to climatic threats. Okay? So the sustainable city, as it goes, is one which has an ecological equilibrium, maximizes efficiency, minimizes waste, and spends interest but not the principal. Okay? So this is what has been proposed by Douglas as what is an inclusive city. It values all the people, where all residents, including the marginalized, their voice is heard, they have access to the basic resources, they have a proper legal housing, they have water, sanitation, and electricity supply, and the distinguishing between the formal and informal sector should be minimized to the minimum so that they are brought within the ambit of all-round development of the city. Now, this concept of inclusive city, as we geographers study, is not something very new. Now, this concept actually came from Lefebvre's book on the right to the city, where they have basically hinted on, at that time, gender discrimination was a very important aspect in human geography. So they have mainly harped on how the urban space, there is disparity in use of urban space. Now, so we come to the gendered space, which is seen basically in more urban areas, which does not make the city inclusive in nature. You can see two pictures over here. On the right, left hand side, you have a picture in one of the developed countries where you have equal representation of male and female in a public space, whereas on the right hand side it is a street of Mumbai where you can see the dominance of male and very few females present over there. The next two picture is a nighttime picture on the left hand side in a developed country, whereas on the right hand side you have a nighttime picture in an Indian city where there is only one woman moving about. So this does not make a city inclusive in nature. Public spaces are also, it is not only, with respect to the marginalized group, but it is also among the other citizens that they are not able to access the space. As you can see a park in the left hand side on the top, this is a park in Mumbai where you have a dominance of male, whereas on the other side you can see a representation, but also over there you see the male counterpart being much more than the female counterpart. Now, this was a new urban agenda which was put forward by the World Habitat Institute for explaining how inclusive cities can be built up with specific reference to variables that can be taken for making the people inclusive in nature. Now, the first thing which they have targeted is social inclusion and ending poverty, because poverty is the root cause. Of course, the root cause is population explosion. Added to it is poverty, and which leads to social exclusion, which should be included so that all citizens get the benefits of development in the city. Now, in order to eradicate poverty, they have given certain parameters. I'm not going into the details, but I'll just highlight on that. You identify the people below poverty line on the basis of sex, age, at the urban level or for the cities. Find out the Gini's coefficient to identify the disparities in the city. Then address inequality in urban areas, as I was telling you, inequality with respect to property and inheritance, where we see that there is a maximum disparity in with respect to gender in access to property. And in many cases, it is seen that the certain communities of people are not given houses on hire, housing is not given on hire, or women, single women are not given houses on hire. So this enhances social exclusion. This should be given importance. Then access to public space, which I've already highlighted, how each and every citizen should have access to public space with no restriction. As we see in the urban areas, many parks are not accessible to many communities or many marginalized groups of the section. So this should be addressed upon. The next most important thing, which I think is very important for making inclusive cities, particularly when I'm coming for a case study of Calcutta, is providing adequate housing. The most important thing which I will be emphasizing over here is that one is providing adequate and affordable housing. Main thing is upgrading the slums and integrate these slum housings or housing as an important component of urban development. In fact, it was only in the late 80s that housing as an important component of urban development was taken up in India. Till then, housing was considered to be a separate sector and not as a component of urban planning in the Indian cities. Okay? The next important component which they have highlighted on is access to basic services, mainly sanitation, water supply, and electricity. And last, which is becoming particularly in this COVID year, access to information technology. In fact, we would not be communicating now if our information technology was not so well developed in the past few years. Otherwise, we could not have communicated. So now this becomes very important, and today access to information technology becomes important for all groups of people, because any discourse, any educational activities today is taking through the digital platform. So that is a very important component for inclusive cities. And of course, last but not the least, as I said, is the inclusive urban economy, where as far as possible, employment to be given to the people living in the informal settlements and formalize the informal sector. I quickly skip these, which are not so essential. Now we go on to how cities can be made inclusive in nature. Now, the most important thing is the inclusive economy, as I've highlighted and I've been telling. The informal sector should be made formalized. Now, what can be done? Now, generally in a formal sector, you will see that you have a pension. You know, most of the people who are working who have a fallback after retirement. So some form of security with respect to the economic activity and a way of providing some source of income once the person becomes old should be an important component of the inclusive economy. Social inclusion should include, you know, the informal settlements which are seen, they should be formalized, so they are less exposed to natural disasters, health hazards. They should have a safety net. You know, some people do not have a house at all over their head. As you can see, you have the homeless population living, and these people should be heard. Their voice should be expressed in the, urban planning measures. Now, these are some of the measures which have been, the heading has not come, I'm very sorry. This is the Sustainable Agenda 11 with respect to India, where we have firstly emphasized on adequate, safe and affordable housing with basic services and upgradation of slums by 2030, which is coming under the Swachh Bharat program, and also the different programs of urban housing like the Indira Awas Yojana, ya Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana comes under this. Then sustainable transport, making transport available. In fact, I think Kolkata is one of the cities in India, which provides most cheapest form of rapid transport system, which is the metro railway. If you compared it with the other cities, it's much cheaper. Hence, it's becoming affordable to all sections of population. Then reduce the number of deaths, particularly water related. So you improve the sanitation. Then environmental impact of the cities with respect to waste generation should be minimized, and specific importance should be given to children and the aged and people with disabilities so that they can be made inclusive in nature. Now, if we come to this case of Kolkata, with respect to sustainability, it is one of the most polluted cities. The economy, you will see that major force is in the informal sector, and resource management, though under the Kolkata Environmental Improvement Program, a lot of steps have been taken up for improving the sanitation and drainage facilities, but still, during the monsoon, we face the vagaries of floods every year. So we come to the inclusive measures. These are some case studies which we have done. We have done two studies with respect to slums. One is how they can be made inclusive with respect to fire hazards, because fire is one recurrent hazard which takes place in the slum because their housing is such that they use materials which are very highly combustible in nature. So with respect to these informal settlements, the methods of formalizing them, as I've said, is basically by providing adequate housing and amenities under the various programs taken up by the government of India, like JNNURM, Amrut, the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, and the last one is making good strides in the informal settlements in the form of National Urban Livelihood Mission, where people are, particularly the women self-help groups, are being given training, and they are taking up economic activities. Now, we did a vulnerability index for the slums of Kolkata, and we identified the vulnerable slums. Now, so we took 3 slums as how they can be made inclusive with respect to fire hazards. One was the Bracebridge slum, the Topshia, and the Bashanti colony. Now, with respect to the base bridge, as you can see, this is the slum area. Now, we did it a buffer zone, and we tried to find out the fire engines, where the fire stations were present. Now, we saw that all the fire stations are far off from the slum which is at the center. So, and thing which we found from the local people, how they grew the resilience to fight this fire. There are 2 water bodies, and it is along the railway track. So it is, what I would say, community resilience, which has helped in the survival of these slums, because, the fire engines cannot reach because the slums have very narrow roads. So these water bodies are connected with tubes, and immediately the fire is being doused. And on top of it, the local fire stations, they have provided these slums with sandbags and buckets so that the water can be immediately taken from these water bodies, and the fire can be doused. The same has been the case of and these 2 water sources have played, along with was the slum municipal corporation. As you can see, like the Kaurapukar canal slums have been relocated to the Purvo Putiari housing complex. But the main problem which was seen over here was that, these slums were much far off from their original residence, and hence these slum dwellers found access to economic activities was very, very difficult. They had to commute over long distances, and being poor, they did not have the means of providing these transportation facilities. So we did a relocation of slums. So we took certain factors into consideration. The three important things which were required: one is the educational facility, health facilities, water resources, both for their daily requirements and if a fire hazard took. And the most important component which we took into consideration is the nearness to the original slum. So buffers were drawn and we identified the facilities which were available, and on the basis of this, a site location was identified. As in the case of this slum, you can see that the site which we located was just 2 kilometers from the original slum, and this was the Greater Calcutta Supply Corporation land of the Government of India, which is completely vacant. It is not used. So this could be used for rehabilitation of these slum sweaters, and this was a highland area. It had a proper drainage facilities, proper access to electricity and water supply, which would have been an ideal site for the development of the slums. Now, another program which has been taken up by the Kolkata Municipal Corporation, which I have seen in ward number 85, where adequate financing is given by Kolkata Municipal Corporation, and the slum dwellers had to just shell in 50,000, which was a loan. And in the same place where they were staying in the slums, multi-storied buildings have been constructed with 1-bedroom kitchen for these slum dwellers. So at least they have access to basic sanitation, a good roof over their head, water supply, and a clean environment, which is one of the most important components of an inclusive city. So I thank you for your patience, for hearing through. So inclusiveness, I have talked mainly about the informal sectors, but it also includes, see, as you can see, many of the senior citizens, they find it very difficult to board the buses where the steps are so high, very high away from the road. So, this is not inclusive. You should think of each and every citizen, their problems, and make planning in such a way that all of them are included as far as possible in the course of urban development. With these few words, I end my presentation, and I think I have finished it within the specified time as mentioned by Swamiji. So thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you for sharing this knowledge and enriching all of us. This will definitely be beneficial for all of us in future. Thank you once again, madam. Now we shall entertain some questions from the audience. Now Rajorshi they has asked Anuradha ma'am, is it possible that the electric car can reduce the percentage of carbon emission and also can solve the climate change and associated problem? Madam has answered his question. Dear Rajarshi, yes, to some extent, but the question remains that we are using coal and petroleum to produce electricity. Ma'am, do you have something more to say about this?
Yes, you see, for electricity production, we are still using traditional sources of energy. We are not switching on to non-conventional sources, because many of the non-conventional sources have a very high initial cost of, installing these. So that is the biggest reason. And because ours is a developing country, ours is a country where poverty levels are also very high, we have not yet entered that phase to switch on to these modes very efficiently. So there lies a host of problems. So that was my answer. Because electricity, yes, because India is also going to have electricity operated car, and it has cars, and it has already started. But you see the price of these cars, and they will be immense. It's beyond the reach of the common man. So there are many other issues that has to be addressed. Just merely saying switching on to electricity won't solve the problem. Battery operated cars also has some kind of hazards. In fact, there's a trade-off between any method we use. One has to see for the immediate concern which will be more beneficial. I think I have answered to what Rajushi had asked. And I think there are a few more other questions also. They have appeared on the chat box. And before
Yes.
I could write back, I can answer them.
I will be reading them through. Thank you, ma'am, for you. Now, the next question is for Dr. Shiva Ramakrishnan, madam. This is from Shabbasachi Misra. Is the idea of inclusive cities same as the idea of smart cities? As far the inclusive cities are concerned, why urban agriculture has not been very popular, providing the fact that more and more people migrating to urban area from the rural parts? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Obik. I have just answered to Shobhushachi Mishra's question. I'm just talking about it. Yes, what he has said. Smart city should be a part of inclusive cities because, as I told you, today is particularly in the COVID times which you are facing. Smart city, one of the important components is a digital component, which should be a part of inclusive city. And as he has rightly pointed out, urban agriculture should be emphasized, which we see in Calcutta. You will see that these Calcutta wetlands was an important source of providing our daily requirements of fruits and vegetables. But now our urban development policy is such that we are converting that into an urban jungle. Whereas we should have emphasized on building up more agricultural activities over there, urban agricultural activities, so that the urban poor can get a source of livelihood. I hope I've been able to answer Sabhyasatchi's answers.
Thank you, ma'am.
Question.
Ma'am, there is another question from you from Shoptendu De. Ma'am, what are the impact of increasing human society to other animals' life?
Who has asked this question? Just a minute.
Shoptendu De.
Yeah, Shoptendu De. Yes, in fact, all the problems which we are facing is due to human interference. There is no doubt about the fact that the human species is the only species over the earth which does not allow other species to survive in coexistence. We are the ones who are very avaricious and we want to use everything for our own benefit. So it is true that the impact of increasing human society is having an impact on the human life. That is why, we teach the students also, like we emphasize on them that, you create as much as nature in your own environment. So at least you can see the birds and bees every day, which is completely missing in most of the urban areas.
Thank you, ma'am. Vikash Kumar has a question. As the rising CO2 level results in global warming across the globe, despite being aware of the fact nations are not enough successful in implementing the UN goals, what should be the best alternative to overcome the hazardous issue? He hasn't mentioned any speaker. Can Arun Radha ma'am speak?
Yes. See, we are conscious, but the thing is that, when we talk about carbon emissions, when we talk about global climate change and all issues related to these emissions, the question is, one has to confront all these issues in a holistic manner. There are many intersectionalities between, each of them. They are cross-cutting issues. The basis of all problems, as has surfaced over the Earth, over the globe, is the crux of the problem, is to address. I have mentioned some of this in my presentation, but I'll reiterate this again, is to how to stabilize the world's population. Secondly, how to address the issue of consumerism. So because we know that, this feature has even become more pronounced post-globalization, earlier we were doing more with less. Now we are doing less with more. That is the problem. How to address this issue? So unless there are several such issues, and it is not at the global levels that policies and programs will make an impact, we have to introduce our self-consciousness also to raise it to that level. How we can, in our own personal individual levels, trying to make a dent in the entire problems. You see, the sustainable development goals are there. They say leave no one behind. Have we ever been able to do that? So all these things should start, it should also have a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach. Unless we raise our consciousness, unless we make concerted efforts to this end, we will never succeed in achieving these macro policies and programs that are there at the global level. That is my, understanding of the entire problem.
Thank you, ma'am. Shona Gupta has a question for Dr. Banerjee. How are climatic changes owing to carbon emissions affect human beings psychologically?
Very, very pertinent question. I really like this question that is being asked. It does. Because you see, once we are having a lot of disasters, all of a sudden this is taking place. These have traumatic effects on human beings. And time and again we are facing this. So it affects the human psyche. It affects, and secondly, with depletion of resources, what human struggle have increased for the poor, for the poorest section of the population. It has increased manifold. So it is not for all. The richer sections, they may have the resilience, but think about the millions of poor. Think about what Professor Lakshmi had said. Think about the people who are working in the informal sectors. They are occupying the tail-end jobs, the low-paid, low-end jobs. Think about them. For them, this is a great psychological impact with a lot of changes taking place, whether it is climate change or depletion of food resources, increase in prices of all commodities that we are envisioning in recent times. So there are many, many issues to this. And some of these, the other speaker, Professor Lakshmi, has also explained. So we have to think all these issues. They do have an effect on human psychology. And you have also seen that how many of these socio-economic issues have led to an increase in violence. It has led to an increase in violence in urban areas. And so earlier we never used to have violence to that extent. So all these issues, I think, are very pertinent and very important. Psychological. Okay. So I think I have answered this question.
Ma'am, there is a second part of this question.
Yes.
Is there any general psychological difference between people living in the high carbon emitting cities and those living in the areas with lower emissions?
It is. There is differences. Differences because the high carbon emitting countries are also, and the cities, they are in a rat race for development. And you see, many of the small carbon emitting are very, very cities which are not very small cities. So life over there is supposedly more peaceful than in these cities. And these cities are also heavily populated with too many activities. So the psychological effect on the population of these cities are, again, not only because of high carbon emissions, because of a host of other factors also. You see, when we discuss any point which has an impact, we cannot see it in isolation from other factors that are operating at the same time. So it is there. Yes, I think I have answered that.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, Shayok Banerjee has a question to you. Does sustainable development goals possible without government participation?
No, It is at all levels again. SDGs is at all levels, as right from the governmental levels with concerted efforts, right down to the grassroots level. So that is necessary.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, there is a question to Dr. Shiva Ramakrishnan from Dipajyoti Chandra. Please ventilate few words on how to bring positive outcome in sustainable community if we are not serious, rather the government on per capita income.
Yes, Dibujyoti, I have read your this question just now. You're true. It is the government and the community as a whole has to take initiative, to bring about a sustainable community. That is, we must try to bring them within the, formal sector. So the government has to play a very important role over here. Along with it, the society also, particularly the non-governmental organizations and the, entrepreneurs, the private entrepreneurs can play a very important role in this. I hope I've been able to answer your question, Dipujyoti.
Thank you, ma'am. We have reached at the end of this question answer session. Again, we have one another question from Shubhranshu Dash. This goes to Dr. Shiva Ramakrishnan. My question to Dr. Shiva Ramakrishnan, ma'am, are there any difference between inclusive city from inclusive smart city? If they are different, how can we transform from inclusive city to inclusive smart city?
See, an inclusive city is a city which is also smart in nature. So smart city is a component of inclusive city where you include each and everyone in the development goals. So whether you have a smart city or any city which we talk about today, it must be inclusive in nature, which is we call where everyone is taken into the development benefits. That is an inclusive city.
Thank you, ma'am. We have reached almost at the end of this webinar. Now I shall request Alik Kumar Mondal sir, Assistant Professor of Ramakrishna Mission Shikshan Mandir, to propose the vote of thanks. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Obi. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay. I deem it a great pleasure for me and honor to propose the vote of thanks of today's program. First and foremost, I would like to extend my very special thanks to our special guest, Dr. Anuradha Banerjee, Professor of School of Social Science, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, for presenting wonderful view on carbon affected cities of the world. And I also express my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Lakshmi Shivaramakrishnan, Professor, Department of Jadavpur University, Department of Geography, Jadavpur University, for her valuable lecture on inclusive cities and sustainable communities with special reference to Kolkata. I believe the outcome of today's program would certainly help in developing our awareness about observation of World Habitat Day. We are grateful to our revered Principal Maharaj, Vice Principal Maharaj, and Exam Controller Maharaj for encouragement and support to organize this program. I would also like to thank all other monastic members, faculty members, and other staff members of our institutions. Last but not least, I thank all the participants of this program who are connected to Google Meet platform, and all the audiences experience this program through YouTube streaming. Once again, I thank on and all. Thank you.
Obik, I'd like to say a few words informally. অনেক প্রশ্ন আসছে তো on behalf of our revered Principal Maharaj, Swami Divyagunanandaji Maharaj, Vice Principal Maharaj, revered Swami Vidyamritanandaji Maharaj, on behalf of all of our faculty members and students, it is our respectful, polite, and warm request, warm invitation to both the speakers Whenever the pandemic situation will be over, please come here. It would be a great honor and pleasure to meet both of you in person, and especially for all the students to get a chance to meet and interact with you. It would be very beneficial for, especially to them and generally for all of us. And Dr. Banerjee lives in Delhi, but whenever you will be here in West Bengal, please come here. And Dr. Shiva Ramakrishnan, I'm not sure, but I think she lives in either in Kolkata or some surrounding areas. So may we expect her comparatively sooner. Uh, so it is informal, but a very warm invitation from our end. Please come here. Namaskar, Anuradha Banerjee and Lakshmi Shiva Ramakrishnan.
Pushkash, we will surely try to make it. I stay very near Jadavpur University, so it's no problem visiting your institution.
ঠিক 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 আর
নমস্কার
দুজনকে আবার জানাচ্ছি, আপনারা যখন এখানে আসবেন পাশে বেলুন মঠ, বেলুন মঠেও
নিশ্চয়ই
আসবেন,
আসবো,
এখানেও
যখনই
আসবেন,
বলবেন।
আমাদের খুব ভালো লাগবে। ঠিক ঠিক।
আমারও বাড়ি কলকাতায়, আমি
হ্যাঁ, আচ্ছা আচ্ছা আচ্ছা
বালিগঞ্জে, তো আমি কলকাতায় মানে খুবই যাই, তো
ঠিক
আমি
ঠিক ঠিক,
নিশ্চয়ই আসবো মহারাজ।
নিশ্চয়ই নিশ্চয়ই,
সো মাচ, অসংখ্য ধন্যবাদ, আমার
ঠিক,
আজকে খুব ভালো লেগেছে।
ঠিক ঠিক।
আমাদের খুব ভালো
আপনাদেরকে
লাগলো
অসংখ্য
আজকে আপনাদের ইন্টারাকশন করে। থ্যাংক ইউ ভেরি মাচ।
থ্যাংক ইউ থ্যাংক ইউ থ্যাংক ইউ।
ধন্যবাদ।
অভিক, ওভার টু ইউ।
We are really thankful to both of our speakers. This was truly a very interactive session. I wish you all Shubho Sharodiya. Stay very safe, very healthy. I would also request our audience to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Ramakrishna Mission Sikshanamandira, so that you will not be missing any webinar notifications coming from our institution. Thank you. Sri Ramakrishna Pranamastu. Devoted to the holy feet of Sri Ramakrishna.
হ্যাঁ, নমস্কার।
নমস্কার সবাইকে।
We end our webinar here.